If you killed Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate and the trial was in the Senate, nobody could convict you.
Raphael Edward Cruz was born in Calgary, Alberta, Canada in 1970. Cruz's parents owned an oil services company called R.B. Cruz & Associates, which provided seismic maps to the oil industry during the Alberta oil boom of the 1970s. As a teenager, young Raphael insisted on being called Ted, which infuriated his Cuban father, also named Raphael. In his youth, he was schooled in laissez-faire capitalism by the Free Market Education Foundation. While his father came from practically nothing, young Ted grew up a privileged youth. His family paid for him to attend 2 private high schools and later Princeton University. Throughout his life, Cruz cozied up to conservative figures like Alan Dershowitz, William Rehnquist, and even joined the George W. Bush 2000 presidential campaign as a legal advisor. In 2003, he was appointed Texas Solicitor General. In 2012, Cruz ran for the United States Senate, successfully winning the seat with the help of free market capitalist group the Club for Growth, the right-wing libertarian advocacy group Freedom Works, and a host of high-profile endorsements from Sarah Palin to Rand Paul, among others. Throughout his career in politics, Cruz has opportunistically aligned himself with whatever movement happened to be popular in the far right at the time. During the Barack Obama administration, he allied with the Tea Party instead of the Republican establishment. During the Donald Trump administration, he allied with the Make America Great Again movement, while the establishment of the party scrambled to determine a way forward. During the lame duck period of the Trump administration, Cruz allied with the insurrectionists and conspiracy theorists. During the Joe Biden administration, Cruz has allied himself with the freshman wave of far-right Republican representatives, and against establishment Republican Mitch McConnell. Cruz's rise to power has little to do with his popularity, magnetism, or political canniness. No, he has those qualities in short supply. Cruz's career is built on shameless sycophantism, attracting the edges of the Republican electorate, adopting and claiming a movement that he was never clever enough to create himself, and remaining in office through the massive Republican voter demographics of red state Texas. A thorough examination of Cruz's career shows him not to be a talented political operative, but a success story of happenstance, geography, and a willingness to attach himself to whatever movement is in the air. As the saying goes, it doesn't take a weatherman to see which way the wind is blowing. Let's go through the stages of Cruz's career, step by awful step. While those in the Tea Party would often cite talk of the historical Boston Tea Party during the 2008 Ron Paul presidential campaign as its progenitor, the movement did not begin in earnest and had no national protests until the first days of the Obama administration. The Tea Party would often cite low taxes and deregulation as its goals, but those were the goals of the mainstream establishment of the Republican Party already. The first national Tea Party protest was urged by a CNBC analyst named Rick Santelli, who admonished the Obama administration's intention to prevent people from losing their homes in the wake of the Great Recession.
This is America. How many of you people want to pay for your neighbor's mortgage that has an extra bathroom and can't pay their bills? Raise their hand. How about we all... President Obama, are you listening? We're thinking of having a Chicago Tea Party in July. All you capitalists that want to show up to Lake Michigan.
Conservatives often racially code any attempt at assisting the poor with terms like welfare queens and handouts to conjure up images that white Americans had been fed for a long time. Even if Santelli had not explicitly said so, white Americans heard him loud and clear. The Tea Party was not a grassroots movement. It was funded by wealthy capitalists, endorsed by wealthy cable news commentators, and mainstreamed by wealthy elected politicians. The goals of the Tea Party politicians were economic, but to accomplish this and to create a movement, they conjured up an enemy, an other that would threaten the predominantly white conservative Republican base. The Tea Party goals may have been related to capitalism, but they fostered racial animus and fear of the loss of racial status. It's the oldest trick in the book. Ted Cruz came fashionably late to the Tea Party, but he soon became one of its rising stars. His entrenched, long-standing views on laissez-faire capitalism and pre-existing political connections made him right for the movement, and his half-Cuban heritage gave the Tea Party a talking point to defend themselves from accusations of racism. Cruz ran on the Tea Party platform in the 2012 Senate race. He won the primary with his, as the Washington Post put it, up-by-the-bootstraps biography, which one assumes did not include his oil industry parents or Ivy League education. His father, perhaps, came from nothing. Ted Cruz came from oil money. But why let the truth get in the way of a good political narrative? Cruz claimed that the United States was heading down the path of European socialism, and that President Obama was responsible. A common tactic among conservatives, painting garden-variety neoliberal policies made popular under Ronald Reagan as newly socialist. The Tea Party ran with this idea because decades of Cold War propaganda led to decades of ignorance about what socialism really is, or even what social democracy is. During his first term as senator, Cruz made some powerful enemies, but not only in the Democratic Party. Cruz was, and still is, unpopular among his Republican colleagues. It has little to do with ideology. Cruz is, after all, well in line with most conservative Republicans. Cruz may be disliked by Democrats for his ideology, but Cruz is disliked among Republicans because they have to work with him, and by all accounts, he is arrogant beyond his marginal talents and so personally unpleasant that the prickliest conservative does not want to be in the same room as him. Cruz is obsessed with his own brand and harms the careers of his colleagues to get what he wants. Republican communications strategist John Ferry once said of this, "Cruz is an army of one, alienating anybody who is in his path. He advocates losing strategies purely to further his own career at the expense of the party." For example, Cruz objected to a criminal justice reform bill that was so widely beloved that everyone from the Koch brothers to the ACLU was in favor of it. Even Cruz's fellow Tea Party caucus senator Mike Lee was in favor of it. Cruz, however, claimed that criminal justice reform would lead to thousands of violent criminals being released out onto the streets. He then threatened his fellow Republicans that if they were to vote in favor of the bill, they would be subjected to, as The Atlantic put it, Willie Horton-style attack ads. In addition to this gauntlet being thrown down against his own party, his rhetoric was duplicitous. Ted Cruz was either lying about the content of the bill or ignorant about it. The bill had no force to release violent criminals. It was mostly about minimum sentencing, among other things. Cruz had a habit of objecting to no-brainer bipartisan efforts, such as the United Nations Treaty on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Cruz tactlessly went after this treaty, even as Bob Dole had come to the Senate floor in his wheelchair to lobby in favor of it. Dole had previously suffered a disabling injury during his service in World War II. In an interview with The New Yorker, the late John McCain said, "It was the most embarrassing day in my time in the Senate, to force Bob Dole to watch that." Cruz led a government shutdown in 2013, his freshman year as a senator, declaring that it was necessary to defund the Affordable Care Act. Cruz must have known this would not work, and Republicans broadly knew that too. It was a waste of time and made the party look bad. Cruz called Mitch McConnell a liar on the Senate floor, mocked Republicans like Bob Dole, Mitt Romney, and John McCain for not winning their presidential elections, all while having no real political accomplishments of his own. Cruz's bad reputation among Republicans came much earlier than this, though. According to an article in Mother Jones, a prominent aide to George W. Bush's 2000 campaign could barely contain himself when we asked him to discuss Cruz, who worked in the campaign's policy shop. The person described Cruz as hyper-arrogant and widely despised, and he emphasized, over and over, that the pervasive dislike of Cruz within the Bush ranks had nothing to do with ideology. In fact, this Bush alum recalls, the quickest way for a meeting to end would be for Ted to come in. People would want out of that meeting. People wouldn't go to a meeting if they knew he would be there. That's exactly what he was, a big a**hole. Back to the Tea Party and his first term as senator, Cruz must have concluded that if Barack Obama could be elected president after only a partial term as a junior senator, then he could too. Cruz did have some data that suggested he would be a viable candidate. Though widely despised among other Republican politicians, Cruz used that in his favor, marketing himself as an outsider. In truth, a former clerk for William Rehnquist, former Solicitor General, and current senator from Texas, one of the most important Republican strongholds in the nation, is not an outsider. He's unpopular in his party because his reputation is god-awful. During his campaign, Democrats were obviously critical of him, but Republicans had some choice words as well. Former Republican Speaker of the House John Boehner called Cruz Lucifer in the flesh. I have Democrat friends and Republican friends. I get along with almost everyone, but I have never worked with a more miserable son of a in my life. Representative Peter King remarked, I hate Ted Cruz, and I think I'll take a cyanide if he ever got the nomination. Bob Dole weighed in with, we need somebody with experience, and there are a lot of good candidates. I like nearly all of them, except Cruz. To top it off, George W. Bush said, I just don't like the guy. Cruz tried to use this aggression to his advantage and began winning primaries, but all of that changed as the field narrowed to 2. In a way, the Make America Great Again movement had its origins not only in the rhetoric of Donald Trump, but in the Tea Party. While the Tea Party dog-whistled to white Americans to create fervor that could allow them to pursue their economic policy goals, MAGA shouted to white Americans. The stage had been set years ago. White Americans were made to feel victimized and humiliated by the first African-American president, and now a strong man had emerged to lend credibility to their racism. For the first time ever, Cruz was outflanked to his political right, and saw his spotlight stolen by an even more obnoxious character. During the primaries, Trump captured nearly all the media attention. He used a series of increasingly inflammatory statements to draw cable news to follow his every movement and record his every word. He bought precious little ad space, but received significantly more airtime than any other candidate in either party, and it was all for free. Of the Republicans, Cruz was second by this metric, but it was a distant second. Cruz could almost certainly feel which way the wind was blowing, and unlike his other Republican colleagues on the debate stage, he tried to not engage with Trump. Any unkind words were generally initiated by Trump. Cruz simply did not have the magnetism to survive Trump, and due to his years of trashing his own party, he did not even have the institutional support to have his colleagues rally to his aid if that were to happen. Cruz tried to play it safe, but that all changed when he managed to win the Iowa caucus. Cruz's campaign falsely claimed that Ben Carson had quit the race in the run-up to the caucus, and that those who were planning to caucus for Carson should switch their support for Cruz. Carson, however, had not announced that he was leaving the race, and he wouldn't do so for another month. Trump pounced, claiming that this constituted election fraud, which is debatable, and that the Iowa caucus should have a do-over, which was impossible. This gave Trump the appearance of the outsider under siege by the establishment forces, a persona that Cruz had carefully cultivated in his career. It was not fraud exactly, but it was a dirty trick, unsurprising from the Cruz campaign. Cruz's dirty politics and Trump's subsequent claims of fraud almost certainly inspired the future president to use this claim whenever he looked as if he might lose. Trump began calling his opponent Lion Ted. Donald Trump, of all people, accusing someone else of being a liar and ascending the moral high ground was preposterous, but the nickname stuck and hounded Cruz for months. In March, an anti-Trump ad commissioned by a super PAC that was not affiliated with the Cruz campaign posted a provocative picture of Melania Trump to encourage socially conservative voters to vote for Cruz. Whether or not the Cruz campaign had anything to do with this is debatable, but it was definitely done to help the Cruz campaign. Trump fired back, posting an unflattering picture of Cruz's wife, Heidi. In April, the disreputable conspiracy theorist Wayne Madsen published an article stating that Ted Cruz's father was photographed with Lee Harvey Oswald shortly before the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Trump jumped on it and helped spread the conspiracy theory. Cruz desperately tried to stay in the race, even choosing a running mate, Carly Fiorina, to give people the impression that he might be the nominee in the end. It was nearly unheard of to publicly announce a vice president during a losing campaign. Cruz quit in May. When the Republican National Convention was held, Cruz initially refused to officially endorse Trump, building his own brand as the true outsider now that Trump was the face of the party. This did not last long. Cruz completely humiliated himself, allowing himself to be recorded making calls for Trump during the general election campaign. Cruz learned that it was better for his career to be with Trump than against him. In October, when an offensive Access Hollywood recording of Trump was released, many Republicans retracted their endorsements or condemned Trump, but not Cruz. He used this opportunity to get in good with Trump. After the election, Cruz quickly became Trump's most loyal supporter because it allowed him to be closer to power than he ever had been before. Cruz also knew that Trump managed to do what he had been trying unsuccessfully to do for years: build an obsessive base of supporters and a brand around himself. Not a reputation for effective governance, but a cult of personality that could transcend his own shortcomings. Trump stopped calling him Lion Ted and called him Beautiful Ted. Cruz supported even Trump's most controversial actions, particularly related to immigration. He called for the repeal of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution that grants citizenship to those born in the United States. He even strongly defended the policy of separating migrant children from their parents. Such positions made him vulnerable in Texas due to its large Hispanic population and large immigrant population. In 2018, he was challenged by Beto O'Rourke, who looked like he had a rare opportunity of unseating a Republican in a red state. However, with support from Donald Trump and the demographics still firmly on his side, Cruz still managed to narrowly win the election. His alliance with Trump had paid off. Once Trump was on his way out of the White House, Cruz enacted his plan to steal the MAGA base. When Trump made his baseless claims of election fraud, the soon-to-be former president had no greater ally than Ted Cruz. Nobody argued in favor of this nonsense conspiracy theory harder than Cruz. Nobody beat the drum harder. Cruz knew enough that it was ludicrous and untrue, but he also knew that this was his opportunity to become the new Trump. To have that brand and that cult of personality that he had desperately wanted for so long. Cruz gave people the impression that he was Trump's second-in-command, not Vice President Mike Pence, who largely stayed out of it and nearly paid a terrible price for it. When the insurrectionists breached the Capitol, some could be heard praising Ted Cruz. A few were even recorded going through Cruz's notebook saying, "I think Cruz would want us to do this."
He's a good one. Him and Lawler or whatever.
Cruz, I think Cruz would want us to do this, so
yeah, absolutely.
I think we're good.
Joe Biden was ultimately inaugurated as president, despite Cruz's objections, but stopping the inauguration was never the strategy. He only wanted to be seen trying to make it happen. That has been Cruz's MO for his entire career, and it finally paid off. Cruz has now set his sights on 2024. He wants to be president, and he has already made moves to suggest he is running. Mike Pence is speculated to run, and he has a lot of support among the Republican establishment, but if Republican voters are still obsessed with Trump by 2024, Pence is going to have a difficult time convincing the people who literally wanted to execute him. If Trump runs, he is probably going to be the nominee. If Trump does not run or is otherwise occupied, Cruz has a chance. So, what could get in his way? Possibly someone like Mike Pompeo or Ron DeSantis, who do not have as much name recognition right now, but really Cruz's biggest obstacle is himself. Here is the perfect example. In the midst of a massive crisis in Texas, in which a storm knocked out power across the state and left millions in peril, Ted Cruz abandoned his constituents and took his family on vacation in Cancun, Mexico. He was first photographed at an airport, with many speculating that it might not even be him. After all, what politician could have so little sense? Even beyond the ethics of it, such a move would be a breach of Politics 101. You can't disappear in a time of crisis. Eventually, it was confirmed to be Cruz. At first, he tried to do damage control, claiming that he was only dropping his family off in Mexico and planned to immediately return. This raised obvious red flags because first, his presence to drop his kids off would not be required. He's not the one flying the plane. Second, his bags and a leaked text message suggested that he was planning to stay for days. His sudden return trip was confirmed to have been made after the scandal broke. Cruz never really took responsibility, blaming it on his children and throwing them under the bus. He also claimed that he did not return due to the scandal but because of his own conscience, and decided he would return as soon as he sat down on the seat of his plane. This, to be clear, is a lie. He's a liar. Cruz kept changing his story over and over again, trying to find some way to do damage control. He was eventually met by protesters near his home. Some conservative commentators tried to cover for Cruz. What else could he do? They asked. Unfortunately for this talking point, it was annihilated when it was pointed out that Beto O'Rourke was helping out on the ground level and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was leading the charge to raise money for the families affected by the storm. Cruz's most recent attempt to do damage control was his speech at CPAC, in which he joked about it in a seemingly self-deprecating way. This had about the same lack of self-awareness as George W. Bush joking about not finding weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The crowd in attendance might have thought it was funny and might have forgiven him, but everyone else saw it for what it was. Ted Cruz is shockingly bad at his job, both as a lawmaker and as a public figure. He is arrogant beyond his ability and painfully unlikable. A counterargument to Cruz being bad at his job and holding unconscionable political positions is that anyone gaining a position of power in their career of choice must be great at it and earned it. Let's try a little experiment. Think about every boss you have ever had. Were they all great at their jobs? Were they all really respectable people? Did you admire them and look up to them? No? Then you have your answer. Mild to moderate success in a career is not always an indicator of ability. This is particularly true of United States politics because the political system does not always reward merit. It tends to reward either gaming the system or, in the case of Ted Cruz, inserting himself into a system that was already rigged in his favor. To conclude, let's examine that and how unpopularity is not always an obstacle to power. When one considers Ted Cruz's lack of popularity and frequent gaffes, the question arises, do we need to take this man seriously? Must we see him as a threat? Common wisdom is that an unpopular politician cannot remain in office for long and cannot climb higher than his current station due to the requirement of garnering votes. However, the United States version of democracy allows for unpopular figures to gain power all the time. Let's go through the House, Senate, Supreme Court, and White House. In the House of Representatives, a nauseating politician can be elected due to gerrymandering. A party can reconfigure the districts in such a way that someone in their party is a sure thing in every election. Any Republican, even a repulsive one. All that Republican needs to do is ride the zeitgeist. Whatever far-right movement engages the fringe will allow that politician to stand out in the primaries and divide the so-called mainstream Republican vote among all the other candidates in the primary. Once the primary is won, the Republican is a shoo-in because it's a gerrymandered Republican district. This might seem outlandish, but that's how we get representatives like Marjorie Taylor Greene. In the Senate, there are greater hurdles. Everyone in the state can vote. Not simply a gerrymandered district. However, states still have demographics and a culture that favors one party over the other. And in Cruz's case, he is a senator in Texas, a red state with a culturally conservative identity. A Republican in a red state only needs one good campaign in the primaries, and after that, the Senate election is usually a foregone conclusion. Mitch McConnell could lose an election in, say, New York, but he can't lose in Kentucky. Furthermore, sitting Republican senators rarely face a serious primary challenge within their own party. This might be a slight exaggeration, but a senator in a red state only needs to be popular for one day. Senators embed themselves in their seats. In the Supreme Court, popularity can be a non-factor. All that matters is who the president chooses. If a Republican president nominates a Supreme Court justice, no matter how loathsome, that nominee will almost certainly be accepted so long as Republicans hold the Senate majority. And once they get through confirmation, they can remain in that position for life. There are no general elections for Supreme Court justices. And what about the White House? Surely an unpopular politician could never be president, right? The presidency can only be achieved from a mandate from the population. Well, no, not really. A president can lose the popular vote by millions and still become president. The last two Republican presidents only reached that office through the Electoral College. In summary, an unpopular politician can go very far in the United States. In 2024, Cruz is up for re-election in the Senate. That is also the year of the next presidential election, and Cruz is widely believed to be considering another run for the White House. After Trump, everything that we thought was disqualifying from the nomination is out the window. Cruz came in second in the 2016 primaries. Without Trump, he could have been the nominee. An unpopular fringe candidate can still win elections by casting the other primary challengers as the establishment, dividing the establishment vote among half a dozen other candidates, and capturing the smaller fringe vote all for himself. Then, as the field narrows to two, the unpopular fringe candidate has gained enough momentum to be seen as the frontrunner and can win through inertia more than anything else. It happened with Trump, and it could theoretically happen again with Cruz. Ted Cruz as President of the United States would be a disaster, even more than the average president. So we should probably stop him. One strategy to keep Cruz out of the White House is to force him to focus on his Senate re-election the same year. If his position in the Senate were to become precarious, he could choose to center his efforts on that instead. A more direct strategy to keep Cruz out of the White House and potentially oust him from his Senate seat is to never let anyone forget about his support for insurrectionists, his conspiracy theories, and his Cancun scandal. These missteps and disqualifying gaffes must be brought up every time his name is uttered. He cannot be allowed to be rehabilitated by 2024. Every speech, every interview, every tweet must be accompanied by a recitation of his most recent scandals. Some people protested near his home when he returned from Cancun. What if the protest just never stops? We cannot allow people to forget who Ted Cruz really is. He can't just grow a beard and reinvent himself. This is who he is. This is who he has always been. Nobody likes Ted Cruz, and we need to make sure it stays that way.